A soccer mom in her 30s, dropping kids off at school, running errands, blending into suburban traffic like any other parent. Her SUV looks ordinary, her smile seems genuine, and her daily routine appears perfectly normal. But sometimes the most extraordinary warriors hide behind the most ordinary masks. What happens when a woman who mastered the art of invisibility suddenly finds herself outnumbered 32-1? What happens when years of careful preparation meet a moment that will define not just her survival, but her legacy? This is the story of Maria Santos, whose minivan held more than soccer balls and school supplies. This is about the day when everything she had trained for, everything she had sacrificed, collided with a reality that would test every skill she possessed. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody sees coming. Maria Santos checked her rearview mirror for the third time in 2 minutes, a habit that had nothing to do with traffic safety and everything to do with staying alive. The morning sun cast long shadows across the suburban street as she pulled into the elementary school drop-off zone, her silver Honda Pilot blending seamlessly with the parade of similar vehicles. "Mom, you forgot to sign my permission slip," 8-year-old Emma announced from the back seat, her backpack already slung over her shoulder. "Check the front pocket, sweetheart," Maria replied, her eyes continuing their systematic scan of the surroundings. 3 cars behind her, normal patterns. 2 crossing guards at their usual posts. Nothing that triggered her internal alarm system. Emma found a signed slip and grinned. "You're the best mom ever." If only she knew the whole truth, Maria thought as she watched her daughter skip toward the school entrance. The truth about the woman who packed her lunch and helped with homework was also the woman who could field strip an assault rifle in under 30 seconds and had once spent 3 weeks living off insects and rainwater in a Colombian jungle. The transformation had taken years to perfect. Maria Elena Vasquez had died in a car accident outside Medellin 7 years ago, at least according to the official records. Maria Santos, suburban mother and part-time yoga instructor, had emerged from that fictional tragedy with a completely new life, new documents, and new purpose. The Central Intelligence Agency had spent considerable resources creating this identity, and she had honored their investment by becoming exactly what they needed her to be: invisible. Her phone buzzed with a text from her handler, disguised as a message from her yoga studio. "New student interested in private sessions. Can you accommodate this afternoon?" The coded language was simple but effective. New intelligence had come in, and she was needed for a briefing. Maria typed back, "Of course. Happy to help. What time works best?" She was confirming availability and requesting details about the urgency level. The response came quickly. 3 p.m. will be perfect. Looking forward to working with you. Standard briefing time and location. Nothing urgent, which was both a relief and a disappointment. After 18 months of suburban life, Maria sometimes missed the adrenaline rush of active operations. She drove through the familiar streets of Millbrook Heights, a carefully chosen community that offered both the anonymity of suburban sprawl and the strategic advantages she needed. The neighborhood sat 30 minutes from downtown Phoenix, close enough to major transportation hubs, but far enough from government buildings to avoid suspicion. Her house backed up to a nature preserve, providing multiple escape routes that she had memorized and practiced during her early morning jogs. The grocery store was her next stop, another layer of the ordinary life she had constructed. Maria had learned that the best cover stories were built on genuine routines. She really didn't need milk and bread. She really was planning to make Emma's favorite dinner. The fact that she also used these trips to conduct surveillance and maintain her network of local contacts was something the other shoppers would never suspect. "Maria, how's the little one doing?" Mrs. Patterson, her elderly neighbor, approached with a shopping cart full of cat food and frozen dinners. "Emma's doing great. Thank you for asking. She's excited about the school play next week." The conversation was genuine, part of the community connections that made her cover story believable. But Maria also noted that Mrs. Patterson was buying more cat food than usual, possibly indicating a change in her routine that might affect the sight lines from Maria's house. "Oh, I'd love to come watch if that's appropriate. I don't have any grandchildren nearby, you know. I'm sure Emma would love to see you there," Maria replied warmly, while mentally noting that she'd need to account for Mrs. Patterson's presence when planning her exit routes from the school if an emergency arose. The briefing location was a coffee shop on the outskirts of Scottsdale, far enough from her neighborhood to avoid local recognition, but close enough to explain as a reasonable destination for a yoga instructor's business meeting. Maria arrived 15 minutes early, ordered a green tea, and selected a table that offered clear sight lines to both entrances and the parking lot. Agent David Chun arrived exactly on time, his appearance as carefully crafted as her own. To outside observers, he looked like a tech entrepreneur or real estate developer, someone who belonged in the upscale coffee shop without drawing attention. He ordered an elaborate drink that would take several minutes to prepare, giving him time to scan the environment before joining her. "Thank you for meeting with me on such short notice," he said as he sat down, maintaining the fiction that this was a business meeting about yoga instruction. "I'm hoping you can help me with some flexibility issues. I specialize in helping people work through challenging positions," Maria replied, confirming that she was ready to receive information. Chun slid a tablet across the table, the screen showing what appeared to be a fitness app, but was actually an encrypted communication platform. "I've been having particular trouble with my lower back. The pain seems to be centered around this area." He pointed to a specific region on the tablet screen. To anyone watching, he was describing a physical ailment. In reality, he was showing her satellite imagery of a compound in northern Mexico where intelligence suggested a major arms trafficking operation was preparing for a significant shipment. The pain point he was indicating was a warehouse complex where weapons were being stored before distribution to various criminal organizations. "That can definitely be problematic," Maria said, studying the layout. "How long have you been experiencing this discomfort?" "About 6 weeks now," Chin replied. "But it's gotten significantly worse in the past few days." 6 weeks meant the operation had been under surveillance for that duration. The recent escalation suggested something was happening soon, possibly within days. "I think I can help you," Maria said. "But this kind of work requires a very specialized approach. Have you tried working with other instructors?" Chin shook his head. "I've consulted with several specialists, but none of them seemed to understand the specific nature of my problem." Translation: other agents had assessed the situation, but none had the particular skill set needed for this operation. Maria felt the familiar tingle of anticipation. After months of school pickup lines and parent-teacher conferences, she was being called back to what she did best. "I'd recommend starting with some basic stretching exercises," she said, acknowledging that she understood and was ready to proceed. "When would you like to begin?" "How about tomorrow evening? I know it's short notice, but the discomfort is really interfering with my sleep." "Tomorrow night." Maria's mind was already shifting into operational mode, calculating travel times, equipment needs, and cover story requirements. Emma had a sleepover at her friend Katie's house, which provided the perfect opportunity. Her absence from a neighborhood would be easily explained. "That should work perfectly," she said. "I'll need about an hour to prepare some customized exercises for your particular situation." Chin nodded and closed the tablet. "I really appreciate your flexibility. I've heard wonderful things about your ability to help people achieve their goals." They finished their drinks while discussing fictional yoga techniques and imaginary client success stories. To anyone listening, it was a boring business conversation between a potential client and a local instructor. In reality, they were finalizing details for an operation that would take Maria back into a world she had temporarily left behind. As Chun left the coffee shop, Maria remained at her table for another 10 minutes, using the time to process what she had learned and begin mental preparations. The compound in Mexico was heavily guarded, surrounded by difficult terrain, and occupied by people who would kill her without hesitation if they discovered her identity. It was exactly the kind of challenge that reminded her why she had chosen this life. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Can I stay for dinner at Katie's? Her mom is making tacos." The timing was perfect, almost suspiciously so. Maria suspected that Sean had somehow arranged this invitation, though she couldn't prove it. The agency was thorough in their planning. Of course, sweetheart, have fun and remember your manners. Maria finished her tea and walked to her SUV, already transitioning from suburban mother to operational agent. The transformation wasn't just mental. It involved changes in posture, breathing patterns, and awareness levels that would be invisible to casual observers but represented a fundamental shift in her entire being. The drive home took her through the quiet streets of her neighborhood, past houses where families were settling into their evening routines. Children played in yards while parents prepared dinner and helped with homework. It was a world that Maria genuinely loved, a world worth protecting, but it was also a world she could never fully belong to. Her house was exactly what a single mother and yoga instructor should own, modest, well-maintained with a small garden and a swing set in the backyard. But the basement contained equipment and capabilities that would astonish her neighbors. The hidden room behind the water heater held weapons, communication devices, false documents, and enough cash to disappear completely within hours if necessary. Maria spent the evening going through her normal routine, checking Emma's homework that had been left on the kitchen table, watering her plants, and watching the local news. But part of her mind was already in Mexico, planning approaches and escape routes, considering variables and contingencies. At midnight, she went to her basement and opened the hidden room. The weapons were clean and properly maintained, the communication devices functional and fully charged. Everything was exactly as it should be, ready for immediate deployment. She selected a compact assault rifle, a sidearm, night vision equipment, and a basic medical kit. The tools of her trade, carefully chosen for the specific requirements of tomorrow's operation. Each piece of equipment had been tested and proven in previous missions, extensions of her own capabilities. As she prepared for bed, Maria looked at the framed photos on her nightstand. Emma at her last birthday party, their vacation to the Grand Canyon, her daughter's school picture with a gap-toothed smile that never failed to make her smile in return. These images represented everything she was fighting to protect, both personally and professionally. Tomorrow night, she would once again become the weapon the agency had spent years training and perfecting. But tonight, she was just a mother missing her daughter's goodnight hug and planning to watch her favorite cooking show before sleep. The duality of her existence was something Maria had learned to manage, but never to reconcile. She was both women simultaneously, the loving parent and the lethal operative, the community member and the ghost who could disappear without a trace. Tomorrow would test both sides of her identity in ways she couldn't yet anticipate. Her last thought before sleep was about Emma's permission slip, safely signed and tucked in her backpack. Such a small thing, but it represented the normal life that made everything else worthwhile. In 12 hours, Maria would be crossing into Mexico with enough firepower to level a city block. But tonight, she was just a mom who remembered to sign permission slips and never missed a school play. The alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m. Though Maria had been awake for the past 20 minutes, her internal clock calibrated by years of operations that demanded precise timing. She moved through her morning routine with the same methodical precision she applied to everything else. Coffee, news, 30 minutes of actual yoga to maintain the cover story, and a final check of her equipment. Emma called at 7, her excited voice chattering about the pancakes Katie's mom had made for breakfast and their plans to build a fort in the backyard. The normalcy of the conversation grounded Maria, reminding her of what she was working to protect. These were the moments that made the dangerous life worthwhile. I love you, sweetheart. Be good for Mrs. Rodriguez, and I'll see you tomorrow night. Love you too, Mom. Don't work too hard at yoga today. If only she knew, Maria thought as she ended the call. Today's work would involve infiltrating a heavily guarded compound, gathering intelligence on a major weapons trafficking operation, and hopefully extracting without leaving any evidence of her presence. Just another day at the office. The drive to the border took 3 hours, time Maria used to mentally rehearse the operation. The compound sat in a valley north of Hermosillo, accessible by a single road that would be heavily monitored. Satellite imagery showed guard towers, patrol patterns, and what appeared to be a sophisticated alarm system. The kind of setup that suggested the people inside had something valuable to protect and the resources to do it properly. Her cover story for the border crossing was solid, but simple. She was visiting a spa resort in Rocky Point for a yoga retreat. The reservation was real, booked, and paid for by the agency, complete with a detailed itinerary that would explain her absence for exactly the right amount of time. Her SUV contained yoga mats, meditation cushions, and organic snacks that supported her story. The border guard was young and clearly bored, going through the motions of checking her passport and asking routine questions. Maria answered with the slightly nervous enthusiasm of a suburban mom taking her first solo trip to Mexico, playing up her uncertainty about driving alone while downplaying any suggestion that she was anything other than a harmless tourist. First time in Mexico, the guard asked in accented English. Yes, and I'm a little nervous, honestly. But my sister insisted I needed some me time, and this retreat came highly recommended. The lie came easily, mixed with enough truth to be believable. Maria did have a sister, though she hadn't spoken to her in 3 years for security reasons. Rocky Point is beautiful. You'll have a great time. Just stick to the main roads and don't drive at night. Oh, I definitely won't, Maria assured him. I plan to be back at the resort before dark every day. 20 minutes later, she was across the border and driving south on Highway 8, maintaining the speed limit and stopping at the appropriate tourist checkpoints. Her route would take her within 40 kilometers of the target compound, close enough to access on foot, while leaving her vehicle in a location that wouldn't raise suspicions. The rendezvous point was a roadside shrine 30 kilometers from her destination, a small memorial decorated with flowers and candles where locals stopped to pray for safe travel. Maria arrived exactly on time to find Agent Sarah Morrison waiting beside a dusty pickup truck, dressed like a local ranch hand in worn jeans and a sun-faded shirt. Vehicle troubles? Morrison asked in Spanish, approaching with the concerned expression of a good Samaritan offering help. Sí, gracias, Maria replied, playing her part as a lost tourist. My GPS stopped working about an hour ago. Morrison popped the hood of Maria's SUV and pretended to examine the engine while actually transferring additional equipment, communication devices, updated intelligence, and backup extraction plans. To any observer, she was a helpful local trying to assist a stranded American tourist. I think it's just a loose connection, Morrison said, closing the hood. But you want to be careful on these roads. There are areas where you don't want to break down, especially after dark. The warning was both genuine concern and operational intelligence. The compound she was targeting sat in territory controlled by the Sinaloa cartel, where strangers asking questions had a tendency to disappear permanently. If something went wrong tonight, Maria would be on her own until she could reach one of 3 extraction points Morrison had just described while pointing at various locations on Maria's tourist map. Thank you so much, Maria said. I don't know what I would have done without your help. De nada. Safe travels. And remember what I said about driving at night. Morrison climbed back in her truck and drove away, leaving Maria alone with her thoughts and her mission. The next phase would require her to abandon the tourist persona entirely and become something much more dangerous. She drove another 15 kilometers to a small village where she stopped for lunch at a family restaurant that catered to truckers and local workers. The food was excellent, but Maria was more interested in observing the local population and confirming that her presence wasn't drawing unwanted attention. The other customers were exactly what she expected. Working people focused on their meals and conversations, paying no attention to a lone American woman eating quietly in the corner. After lunch, she drove to a remote hiking trail that, according to her tourist guidebook, offered spectacular views of the desert landscape. The trail was real, though she doubted many tourists actually made the effort to find it. More importantly, it provided access to the ridge line that overlooked her target compound, while offering multiple escape routes if the situation deteriorated. Maria parked her SUV at the trailhead and began hiking, her day pack containing water, snacks, and binoculars that would support her cover as an enthusiastic tourist photographer. The hidden compartments held her real equipment, weapons, communication gear, and the specialized tools she would need for tonight's operation. The hike took 2 hours, following goat trails and deer paths that kept her off the main track while bringing her steadily closer to her observation point. The desert was beautiful in the late afternoon light, painted in shades of gold and red that reminded her why she had fallen in love with the Southwest. But beauty wouldn't stop a bullet, and she remained constantly alert for signs that she was being watched or followed. The ridgeline offered a perfect view of the compound, confirming what the satellite imagery had shown while revealing details that only direct observation could provide. The facility was larger than expected, with 3 main buildings surrounded by high walls and guard towers. Armed men patrolled in predictable patterns, suggesting military training, but also indicating potential vulnerabilities. Through her binoculars, Maria counted at least 20 visible guards, though the actual number was probably twice that when accounting for those inside the buildings. The weapons were top-tier military hardware, not the improvised guns typical of most criminal organizations. Someone was investing serious money in this operation, which meant the stakes were higher than the initial intelligence had suggested. She spent 3 hours conducting detailed surveillance, mapping guard rotations, identifying security cameras, and looking for weaknesses in their defensive perimeter. The compound was well-designed and professionally managed, but it wasn't perfect. The northern wall had a blind spot where the guard towers couldn't provide overlapping coverage, and the patrol timing created a 90-second window when that section would be unobserved. As the sun set, Maria moved to a secondary observation point that offered a different angle on the compound. The change in perspective revealed something the satellite imagery had missed: a concealed entrance on the east side of the main building, probably designed for quick escapes or discreet arrivals. That entrance would be her way in, assuming she could reach it without triggering the security system. Her communication device vibrated with an incoming message from Morrison. Package delivered as requested. Enjoy your evening. Translation: updated intelligence had been transmitted, and Maria was cleared for the operational phase of her mission. The new information was both good and bad news. Good because it confirmed that the compound contained exactly what she had come to find: detailed records of the weapons trafficking network, including shipment schedules and contact information for buyers across Latin America. Bad because it also revealed that the facility would be hosting a meeting tomorrow night with representatives from 3 different criminal organizations, meaning security would be dramatically increased within 24 hours. Tonight was her only realistic window for infiltration. If she waited, the opportunity would disappear for months while the various criminal groups conducted their business, and then returned to their respective territories. Maria spent another hour studying the compound, memorizing every detail and running through mental rehearsals of her approach. The operation would require perfect timing, absolute silence, and a considerable amount of luck. Any mistake would likely result in her death, and the exposure of a major intelligence operation that had taken years to develop. At midnight, she began her approach to the northern wall, moving through the desert with the patience and precision of a predator. Every step was calculated to avoid loose rocks or thorny plants that might create noise. Every pause was timed to coordinate with the guard rotations she had memorized during her surveillance. The compound security system was sophisticated but not perfect. The motion sensors were calibrated to ignore small animals, which meant Maria could move undetected as long as she stayed low and moved slowly. The night vision cameras were positioned to monitor the obvious approach routes, but they couldn't cover every square meter of the perimeter. It took 45 minutes to reach the blind spot on the northern wall, 45 minutes of careful movement through terrain that could have killed her in a dozen different ways. The desert at night was full of rattlesnakes, scorpions, and other creatures that could end her mission with a single bite or sting. But Maria had trained in similar environments around the world, and her movement was confident despite the obvious dangers. The wall was 3 meters high and topped with razor wire, designed to stop casual intruders, but not someone with Maria's training and equipment. She used a small grappling hook to create a secure anchor point, then climbed with the fluid grace of someone who had scaled much more challenging obstacles. The razor wire required careful navigation, but her heavy gloves and protective clothing allowed her to cross without injury. Once inside the compound, she became part of the shadows, moving between buildings with the patience of someone who understood that haste was the enemy of success. The guards were professional, but not exceptional, following their assigned routes with the mechanical precision of people performing a familiar routine. The main building was her primary target, but Maria took time to examine the secondary structures first. Information gathering was like archaeology. Sometimes the most valuable discoveries were found in unexpected places. The smaller buildings contained living quarters, storage areas, and what appeared to be a workshop where weapons were modified for specific customers. The workshop was particularly interesting because it contained evidence of sophisticated modifications that required advanced technical knowledge. Someone with military ordnance experience was working here, someone who understood how to alter weapons for maximum effectiveness in different operational environments. That information would be valuable to intelligence analysts trying to understand the scope and capabilities of the trafficking network. But her primary target was the main building, where intelligence suggested the operational records were kept. Getting inside would require bypassing an electronic lock system that appeared to use both keypad entry and biometric scanning. The keypad she could defeat with standard techniques, but the biometric scanner would require a different approach. Fortunately, Maria had observed one of the senior guards entering the building during her surveillance. The man had a distinctive walking pattern that suggested an old leg injury, and he smoked cigarettes that he discarded in a predictable location near the building's entrance. With luck, she might be able to recover a cigarette, but with usable fingerprints and DNA traces. The search took 15 minutes of careful exploration around the building's perimeter, but Maria eventually found what she was looking for, a freshly discarded cigarette that the guard had thrown into the bushes less than 2 hours earlier. The paper was still damp with saliva, perfect for her purposes. Using a small forensic kit from her equipment pack, Maria carefully collected samples from the cigarette and prepared them for use with the biometric scanner. The process was delicate and time-consuming, but it was her best option for gaining access without triggering alarms. 20 minutes later, she was inside the main building, moving through corridors that smelled of tobacco and machine oil. The layout was straightforward. Administrative offices on the ground floor, storage areas in the basement, and what appeared to be living quarters on the second floor. Her target was most likely in one of the ground floor offices, where the operational leaders would conduct their business. The third office she examined contained exactly what she had come to find: detailed records of weapons shipments, financial transactions, and communication logs that revealed the full scope of the trafficking operation. The information was stored on both paper and digital media, suggesting that someone understood the importance of maintaining redundant records. Maria used her portable scanner to copy the most important documents while photographing others with a specialized camera that could operate in complete darkness. The work was methodical and time-consuming, but rushing would increase the risk of missing critical intelligence. As she worked, she could hear the guards continuing their patrols outside, their footsteps and radio chatter creating a rhythm that helped her track their movements. So far, everything was going according to plan, but Maria knew that operations had a tendency to fall apart at the worst possible moment. She was copying the last set of financial records when her communication device vibrated with an emergency alert from Morrison. Unexpected activity at primary location. Recommend immediate extraction. Through the office window, Maria could see vehicle headlights approaching the compound's main entrance. Someone was arriving ahead of schedule, which meant her carefully planned exit window was about to disappear. She had perhaps 10 minutes before the new arrivals reached the main building and discovered evidence of her presence. The records were only partially copied, but Maria made the tactical decision to prioritize survival over complete intelligence gathering. Half the information was better than no information at all, and dead agents couldn't file reports. She gathered her equipment and prepared to exit the way she had entered. But the sound of voices in the corridor outside the office indicated that the building was no longer empty. Someone had come inside ahead of the main group, possibly to prepare for the unexpected meeting. Maria found herself trapped in an office with at least 3 armed men between her and the exit, carrying stolen intelligence that would expose her as a spy if discovered. The situation had just transformed from a successful infiltration to a potential disaster, and she had only minutes to find a solution before everything fell apart. Maria pressed herself against the office wall beside the door, listening to the voices in the corridor while calculating her rapidly diminishing options. 3 men, possibly 4, speaking in rapid Spanish about security preparations for the unexpected arrivals. Their tones suggested urgency, but not alarm, which meant they hadn't yet discovered any evidence of her presence. The window behind her offered an alternative exit, but it was 12 feet above ground level and would place her directly in the sight line of the nearest guard tower. The roof access might provide better options, but reaching it would require moving through areas of the building she hadn't mapped during her reconnaissance. Her communication device vibrated again with another message from Morrison. Multiple vehicles approaching. Estimate 20 additional personnel arriving within 5 minutes. Abort immediately. 20 additional people would transform the compound from a manageable security challenge into an impossible situation. Maria made the tactical decision to attempt an immediate exit through the window, accepting the risk of exposure rather than certain capture if she remained inside the building. She secured her equipment pack and prepared to move when she heard footsteps approaching the office door. Someone was conducting a systematic check of the building, moving from room to room with the methodical precision of a professional security sweep. In 30 seconds, they would reach her location. The office had a small closet that might provide temporary concealment, but hiding would only delay the inevitable discovery. Better to take control of the situation while she still had some element of surprise. Maria positioned herself behind the door and waited, her hand resting on the grip of her sidearm. The footsteps paused outside the office, and she heard the distinctive sound of someone testing the door handle. The door began to open slowly, revealing the barrel of an assault rifle and the shoulder of someone exercising tactical caution. The guard entered the office exactly as Maria had hoped, focused on the potential threat areas while temporarily exposing himself to attack from behind the door. She moved with fluid precision, striking the pressure point at the base of his neck with enough force to render him unconscious without causing permanent injury. The man collapsed silently, but his radio immediately crackled with a voice asking for a status report. Maria had perhaps 90 seconds before his failure to respond would trigger a more intensive search of the building. She dragged the unconscious guard into the closet and secured him with zip ties from her equipment pack. His radio and weapons would be missed if they disappeared, but she couldn't leave them where they might be used against her. The compromise solution was to damage the radio in a way that suggested equipment failure rather than deliberate sabotage. The window proved more challenging than expected. The frame was painted shut and required careful prying to open without creating obvious noise. Each small sound seemed amplified in the silent office, and Maria expected at any moment to hear shouts of discovery from the corridor. Outside, the arriving vehicles had reached the main compound entrance, and she could see armed men deploying in defensive positions around the perimeter. Whatever meeting was taking place tonight, the participants were taking security very seriously. Maria lowered herself through the window and hung briefly from the frame before dropping to the ground below. The impact was harder than expected, sending a jolt of pain through her left ankle, but nothing appeared to be seriously injured. She was now outside the main building, but still deep inside the compound security perimeter. The guard towers had clear sight lines to her current position, and the patrol schedules she had memorized were meaningless now that additional personnel were arriving. Her best option was to reach the vehicle maintenance area on the eastern side of the compound, where several trucks and SUVs were parked in positions that would provide concealment for her movement toward the perimeter wall. But crossing the open ground between her current position and the maintenance area would require perfect timing and considerable luck. A shout from inside the main building indicated that the unconscious guard had been discovered. Within seconds, the entire compound would be on high alert, and her window for escape would disappear completely. Maria sprinted toward the maintenance area, abandoning stealth in favor of speed. Behind her, she could hear doors slamming and voices shouting orders as the search for the intruder began in earnest. Searchlights blazed to life, sweeping across the compound with mechanical precision. She reached the first vehicle just as the lights swept across her previous position, diving behind a pickup truck that provided temporary concealment. But the trucks also created blind spots that the guards would want to clear, and she could already hear footsteps approaching from multiple directions. The fence was still 60 meters away, an impossible distance to cover without being seen by the men now spreading out across the compound. Maria needed a distraction, something that would draw their attention away from her escape route long enough for her to reach the perimeter. Her equipment pack contained several devices designed for exactly this situation, including smoke grenades and small explosive charges that could create confusion without causing significant casualties. But using them would confirm that a professional operative had infiltrated the compound, potentially compromising future operations in the region. The decision was taken out of her hands when one of the guards rounded the corner of the truck she was hiding behind, his assault rifle raised and ready. They saw each other simultaneously, but Maria had the advantage of preparation and training. She struck first, using her elbow to deflect his weapon while simultaneously driving her knee into his solar plexus. The guard doubled over, gasping for breath, but managed to trigger his radio before losing consciousness. "Intruso en el área de vehículos," his voice crackled over the radio before cutting off abruptly. Now the entire compound knew exactly where she was located. Within minutes, they would surround the maintenance area and conduct a systematic search that would inevitably find her. The time for subtlety had passed. Maria activated one of her smoke grenades and threw it toward the center of the compound, creating a billowing cloud that would confuse the searchlights and disrupt the guards' coordination. Then, she began running toward the fence, no longer concerned with concealment. The smoke bought her precious seconds, but the guards were professional and adapted quickly to the new situation. She could hear them calling out coordinates and organizing search patterns that would systematically eliminate her hiding places. Gunfire erupted behind her as nervous guards fired at shadows in the smoke, their muzzle flashes creating strobing patterns in the artificial fog. None of the shots came close to her position, but they served to increase the general level of chaos and confusion. The fence was now 30 meters away, close enough that she could see the razor wire gleaming in the searchlight beams. But between her position and the perimeter, 6 armed men were advancing in a tactical formation that would bring them directly across her path. Maria pulled a second smoke grenade from her pack and threw it toward the advancing guards, then immediately changed direction to avoid the area they would naturally search first. The movement took her further from the fence, but away from the immediate threat. She found temporary concealment behind a concrete barrier that appeared to be part of an unfinished construction project. The position offered protection from the guards' gunfire, but was also a dead end that would trap her if they managed to surround her location. Her communication device showed 3 missed messages from Morrison, each one more urgent than the last. The final message was simple: extraction impossible. Go to ground and wait for opportunity. Going to ground meant finding a hiding place and waiting for the search to lose intensity, then attempting escape during a period of reduced vigilance. It was a viable tactic in urban environments where there were numerous places to hide, but the desert compound offered limited options for long-term concealment. The sound of helicopters in the distance added a new dimension to her tactical situation. If aerial surveillance was being deployed, her chances of reaching the perimeter undetected were virtually zero. She needed to find a way out of the compound before the helicopters arrived and began systematic searches of the surrounding desert. A new voice came over the guard's radio frequency, speaking with the authority of someone in command. Secure the perimeter. Nobody leaves without my personal authorization. Search every building, every vehicle, every hiding place. Find the intruder. The voice was calm and professional, suggesting military training and operational experience. Maria was no longer dealing with ordinary security guards, but with someone who understood counterintelligence procedures and would not be easily fooled by misdirection or confusion. She counted at least 30 distinct voices on the radio frequency now, confirming that the arrival of additional personnel had tripled the size of the security force. The compound had transformed from a lightly guarded facility into a military installation in the space of 20 minutes. The helicopter sound was getting closer, and Maria could see searchlight beams beginning to sweep the areas outside the compound walls. In 5 minutes, possibly less, she would be facing coordinated air and ground search teams with sophisticated equipment and unlimited patience. Her options had narrowed to two possibilities: find a way to disappear completely within the compound until the search intensity decreased, or create enough chaos to overwhelm the security response and escape during the confusion. The first option required finding a hiding place that could conceal her for hours or possibly days while keeping her equipment pack and weapons secure. The second option meant abandoning any pretense of covert operation and engaging in open combat with overwhelming odds. Maria chose a third option that combined elements of both approaches. She would create a significant distraction that would draw most of the security force to one area of the compound. Then, use the resulting chaos to reach an area where she could remain hidden until extraction became possible. Her equipment pack contained enough explosive charges to destroy several vehicles, which would create fires and secondary explosions that would require immediate attention from the security force. The destruction would also serve as a signal to Morrison that the operation had been compromised and emergency extraction procedures should be initiated. She selected 3 of the largest vehicles in the maintenance area, military-style trucks that would create impressive explosions and sustained fires. The charges were small, but specifically designed to ignite fuel tanks and create maximum visual impact. Placing the charges required moving between vehicles while avoiding the searchlight beams and patrol teams that were systematically clearing the area. Maria used the smoke from her earlier grenades as concealment, but the artificial fog was beginning to dissipate in the desert breeze. The first charge was placed successfully on a fuel truck that would create a spectacular fireball when it exploded. The second charge went on an ammunition transport that would provide ongoing explosions for several minutes. The third charge was reserved for the compound's main generator, which would plunge most of the facility into darkness and disrupt their coordination. As she prepared to activate the charges, Maria heard the distinctive sound of trained men moving through the maintenance area with tactical precision. The search had reached her location, and she had perhaps 2 minutes before they would find her hiding place behind a concrete barrier. She activated all 3 charges simultaneously, setting the timers for 30-second delays that would give her time to reach a safer position before the explosions began. Then, she began moving toward the eastern wall, where the generator building offered both concealment and access to the compound's electrical systems. The first explosion shook the entire compound, lighting up the night sky with a brilliant orange fireball that could be seen for kilometers in every direction. The fuel truck had ignited exactly as planned, creating flames that rose 30 meters into the air and generated enough heat to be felt across the entire facility. Shouts of alarm filled the radio frequencies as guards rushed toward the fire, abandoning their search patterns to deal with the immediate crisis. The second explosion followed 10 seconds later, sending the ammunition truck into a spectacular display of secondary detonations that sounded like a full-scale battle. Maria used the confusion to reach the generator building, a small concrete structure that contained the diesel engines that powered the compound's electrical systems. The building was unguarded and unlocked, probably because no one had anticipated that it might be targeted during an infiltration. The third explosion plunged half the compound into darkness as the main generator suffered catastrophic damage. Emergency lighting activated automatically, but the coverage was limited and created new shadows where none had existed before. She was now inside a building that was unlikely to be searched in the immediate aftermath of the explosions, with access to backup communication equipment and detailed maps of the compound's electrical systems. More importantly, the generator building had a maintenance tunnel that connected to the compound's water treatment facility outside the main security perimeter. The tunnel was narrow and uncomfortable, designed for utility maintenance rather than human passage, but it offered a concealed route out of the compound that would bypass all the security checkpoints and guard positions. Maria began crawling through the tunnel as the sound of sirens and shouting continued above ground. Behind her, the compound was dealing with multiple fires, electrical failures, and the search for an intruder who had seemingly vanished into thin air. The tunnel emerged in a concrete structure housing water pumps and filtration equipment, located 50 meters beyond the compound's outer wall. From this position, she could observe the ongoing chaos while remaining safely concealed from the search teams. Her communication device finally received a clear signal from Morrison, extraction team en route to secondary rendezvous point. Can you reach location? The secondary rendezvous point was 5 kilometers away across open desert, but it was now achievable given her position outside the security perimeter. Maria confirmed her ability to reach the location and began planning her route across terrain that she had studied during her initial reconnaissance. As she prepared to leave the water treatment facility, she could see the helicopters circling the compound like mechanical vultures, their searchlights creating patterns of light and shadow across the desert floor. The pilots were focusing their attention on the immediate area around the compound, assuming that the intruder was still hiding somewhere within the perimeter. That assumption would give her the time she needed to reach the extraction point, but only if she moved quickly and carefully across the 5 kilometers of desert that separated her from safety. Maria shouldered her equipment pack and began walking into the darkness, leaving behind a compound that would be searching for her until dawn and probably beyond. She had obtained critical intelligence about a major weapons trafficking operation, but the cost had been the exposure of her methods and possibly her identity. The mission had been partially successful, but it had also marked the end of her comfortable suburban cover. After tonight, Maria Santos, the yoga instructor, would have to disappear, and a new identity would have to be created for whatever came next. The desert stretched endlessly before Maria as she navigated by starlight and memory, each step taking her further from the chaos she had left behind. The extraction point was still 4 kilometers away when her communication device buzzed with an urgent message from Morrison: abort extraction. Multiple pursuit teams deployed. Go to ground immediately. Maria stopped walking and listened to the night around her. In the distance, she could hear the sound of vehicles leaving the compound, their engines growing louder as they spread out across the desert in search patterns. The helicopters had expanded their search radius and were now sweeping the areas beyond the compound perimeter. She was being hunted by professional trackers across terrain that offered minimal concealment, carrying equipment that would confirm her identity as a foreign intelligence operative if she was captured. The situation had deteriorated from a compromised infiltration to a potential international incident. Her training kicked in automatically, shifting her from escape mode to evasion mode. Instead of trying to reach a distant extraction point, she needed to find immediate concealment and wait for the search intensity to decrease. The desert was hostile, but it was also vast, and even professional searchers couldn't cover every square kilometer simultaneously. A rocky outcropping 200 meters to her east offered potential shelter, but reaching it would require crossing open ground that might be visible to the aerial surveillance. Maria made the tactical decision to accept the risk rather than remain exposed in her current position. She low-crawled across the desert floor, using techniques learned during mountain warfare training in Afghanistan. The movement was slow and exhausting, but it kept her profile below the sight lines of anyone using standard optical equipment. The rocks and thorny plants tore at her clothing and exposed skin, but pain was a luxury she couldn't afford to acknowledge. The outcropping provided better concealment than she had hoped, with caves and crevices that could hide a person indefinitely if they were patient enough to remain motionless. Maria selected a position that offered observation capabilities while keeping her completely hidden from aerial surveillance. From her hiding place, she could see the search teams deploying across the desert with military precision. 3 helicopters were conducting systematic sweeps using both searchlights and thermal imaging equipment. 6 ground teams were advancing in coordinated patterns that would eventually cover every possible escape route from the compound. Her communication device remained silent, indicating that Morrison was following protocol by avoiding transmissions that might be intercepted by the search teams. Maria was effectively on her own until the immediate threat passed and extraction became possible again. The search teams were well-equipped and professionally trained, but they were also operating under time pressure that worked in Maria's favor. Extensive search operations were expensive and difficult to sustain, especially in hostile territory where the Mexican authorities might begin asking uncomfortable questions about large numbers of armed men conducting military-style operations. She settled into her concealment position and began the waiting game that was a fundamental part of covert operations. Hours of motionless silence, broken by moments of intense activity, requiring mental discipline that separated professional operatives from enthusiastic amateurs. The first ground team passed within 50 meters of her position 2 hours after dawn, their movements indicating fatigue and declining alertness that came from searching unsuccessfully for too long. The team leader was maintaining discipline, but Maria could see signs that his men were beginning to question whether their quarry was still in the area. By noon, the helicopter patrols had been reduced from 3 aircraft to 1, and the ground teams were beginning to consolidate their search areas rather than expanding them. The operational commander was making the logical decision to concentrate his limited resources rather than spreading them too thin across an impossibly large area. Maria's water supply was running low, and the desert heat was becoming a serious factor in her tactical calculations. Remaining hidden was essential, but dehydration would eventually force her to move regardless of the security situation. She needed to find a water source or reach extraction within the next 12 hours. Her communication device finally buzzed with a message from Morrison. Search intensity decreasing. New extraction point available. Can you move after dark? The new extraction point was 8 kilometers away, further than the original location, but in an area that the search teams had already covered and abandoned. Maria confirmed her ability to move after sunset and began planning her route across terrain that she would have to navigate in complete darkness. As the afternoon progressed, she observed the search teams withdrawing toward the compound, their operations hampered by the increasing heat and their apparent conclusion that the intruder had escaped the immediate area. The helicopters were conducting wider circles that suggested they were transitioning from intensive search to general surveillance. At sunset, Maria prepared to leave her concealment and begin the long walk to the extraction point. She had been motionless for nearly 10 hours, and her muscles protested as she carefully stretched to restore circulation and flexibility. She was preparing to move when she heard voices approaching her position from the east, speaking in Spanish about checking one more area before returning to base. 2 men, possibly 3, conducting a final sweep of the rocky outcropping where she had been hiding. Maria froze in position, hoping they would conduct a cursory examination and move on to their next checkpoint. But the voices were getting closer, and she could hear footsteps on the rocky ground outside her concealment. A flashlight beam swept across the entrance to her hiding place, missing her position by inches. One of the searchers was being thorough, examining cracks and crevices that his colleagues had probably dismissed as too small to hide a person. "I'll go a key," a voice said directly outside her position. "Something here." The beam swept across her location again, this time penetrating deeper into the crevice where she had spent the day. Maria knew she had perhaps 10 seconds before the light would illuminate her position and end her mission permanently. She drew her sidearm and prepared to engage, calculating angles and distances while hoping that surprise and superior training would compensate for being outnumbered in close quarters. The alternative was capture and interrogation that would compromise not just her mission, but the entire network of operations in the region. The first man entered her hiding place with his weapon raised, moving with the cautious confidence of someone who suspected he had found what he was looking for. Maria waited until he was committed to the confined space before moving, knowing that she would have only one opportunity to gain tactical advantage. She struck from an angle he couldn't see, her knife finding the gap between his body armor and helmet with surgical precision. He collapsed silently, but his failure to respond to radio calls would alert his companions within minutes. "Carlos? Respond," came a voice from outside the hiding place. Maria had two choices: remain hidden and hope the second man would assume his partner had moved to a different area, or engage immediately while she still controlled the initiative. She chose aggression over hope. The second man was reaching for his radio when Maria emerged from the crevice, moving with the fluid speed that came from years of combat training. Her second knife throw was equally precise, eliminating the threat before he could alert the search teams to her location. But the silence that followed was broken by the sound of approaching footsteps, and Maria realized there had been a third member of the search team who was now investigating why his colleagues had stopped responding to radio calls. She retrieved her weapons and prepared to engage the third searcher, but the situation was deteriorating rapidly. 3 missing men would trigger an intensive search of the immediate area, probably involving additional helicopters and possibly tracking dogs. The third man appeared at the base of the outcropping, calling out to his missing teammates while maintaining tactical alertness. He was older than the others, probably the team leader, and his movements suggested military training and combat experience. Maria had the advantage of elevation and concealment, but engaging him would confirm her presence in an area that the search teams had been preparing to abandon. The tactical situation required a decision between immediate survival and longer-term mission security. She chose survival, using a suppressed weapon to eliminate the third searcher before he could call for backup. The engagement was quick and professional, but it left her with 3 bodies and the certainty that their disappearance would trigger a massive search operation. Her communication device buzzed with another message from Morrison: "Search teams withdrawing. Move to extraction immediately." But Maria knew the situation had changed. 3 missing searchers would bring helicopters, dogs, and additional personnel back to her area within hours. The extraction point was now compromised, and she needed to find a completely different approach to escape. She gathered the weapons and equipment from the 3 men, consolidating ammunition and communication devices that might provide intelligence about the search operations. More importantly, she now had local radio frequencies and call signs that could be used to monitor pursuit activities. The radio traffic confirmed her assessment of the situation. The missing team had failed to report for their scheduled check-in, and search coordinators were already dispatching additional units to their last known location. Maria had perhaps 30 minutes before the rocky outcropping would be swarming with armed men looking for their missing colleagues. She began moving west toward higher ground that would provide better observation capabilities and more escape routes. The terrain was challenging in darkness, but it also offered concealment opportunities that hadn't existed in the open desert. As she climbed toward the ridge line, Maria could see vehicle headlights converging on the area she had just vacated. The search teams were responding quickly and professionally, but they were also making the tactical mistake of assuming she was still in the immediate vicinity. Her radio intercepts revealed that they had found the bodies of the 3 searchers and correctly identified them as the victims of a professional killer. The search coordinator was now treating this as a military operation rather than a police investigation, which meant rules of engagement had probably shifted from capture to elimination. Maria reached the ridge line as the first helicopters arrived at the rocky outcropping, their searchlights illuminating the area where she had spent the day. The intensity of the response confirmed that she was now facing the full resources of the organization she had infiltrated, plus whatever local assets they could mobilize on short notice. But the ridgeline also offered something she hadn't expected: a clear view of the compound and the ongoing activities around the main buildings. Through her binoculars, she could see that the facility was being evacuated, with vehicles loading equipment and personnel for immediate departure. Her infiltration and the subsequent search operations had accomplished something the original mission hadn't intended, forcing the trafficking organization to abandon a major operational base and relocate their activities. The intelligence she had gathered was valuable, but the disruption of their operations was potentially more significant. The radio traffic indicated that search teams were deploying across a 10-kilometer radius, using coordination and resources that suggested military or paramilitary training. Maria was facing not just a security response, but a full-scale manhunt conducted by people who understood counterintelligence operations. She counted at least 32 distinct voice signatures on the radio frequencies, representing teams that were now spreading across the desert in search patterns designed to prevent escape rather than locate a hidden target. They were assuming she was mobile and trying to reach extraction, which was tactically correct but also created opportunities for misdirection. Maria realized she was facing a decision that would define the rest of her life. She could continue trying to evade the search teams and eventually reach extraction, preserving her cover identity and returning to suburban life with her daughter. Or she could use her tactical advantages to systematically eliminate the pursuit teams, ending the threat permanently, but also ending any possibility of returning to normal life. The choice was between Maria Santos, the yoga instructor, and Mother, or Maria Elena Vasquez, the ghost who had never really died. Between the life she wanted and the life she was trained for. As helicopters circled overhead and ground teams closed in from multiple directions, Maria made her decision. She would not run from 32 enemy soldiers. She would hunt them. The transformation was complete the moment Maria made her decision. The suburban mother who worried about permission slips and parent-teacher conferences dissolved into the mountain air, replaced by something far more dangerous. Maria Elena Vasquez had returned, and 32 men were about to discover why the intelligence community had once considered her their most effective operative. She began with reconnaissance, using her elevated position to map the deployment of the search teams across the desert floor. The tactical coordinator was competent, establishing interlocking fields of fire and communication protocols that would make standard evasion techniques ineffective. But he was also operating under assumptions that would become fatal weaknesses. The first assumption was that Maria was trying to escape rather than engage. The second was that she was operating alone without support assets. The third was that she was limited to the equipment she could carry in a single pack. All three assumptions were wrong. From her position on the ridgeline, Maria could see the compound's evacuation continuing under the protection of the search teams. Large trucks were loading equipment and materials that represented years of operational development, while helicopters ferried key personnel to presumably safer locations. The operation was well-coordinated, but rushed, creating vulnerabilities that could be exploited by someone with the right combination of training and tactical patience. More importantly, the evacuation was concentrating valuable targets in predictable locations, while their protection was distributed across the desert searching for a ghost. Maria activated her backup communication system, a satellite uplink that bypassed local networks and connected directly to Morrison's command center. The signal was brief and coded, but it conveyed essential information. She was operational and engaging multiple targets. Morrison's response was immediate. negative. Abort engagement. Extraction in progress. But Maria was no longer taking orders from handlers who couldn't see the tactical situation. She was operating under the older, deeper programming that had made her legendary in places whose names appeared on no maps. The first target was Team Alpha, a four-man unit advancing along the eastern approach to her position. Their movement was professional but predictable, following terrain features that provided cover while maintaining radio contact with their coordinator. Maria descended from the ridge line using routes that were invisible to ground observation, moving through shadows and dead ground with the patience of a predator that had all the time in the world. The desert was her environment now, not theirs. She reached a position 50 meters behind Team Alpha's advance, close enough to hear their whispered communications and observe their individual characteristics. The team leader was experienced but overconfident, his men competent but not exceptional. They were searching for a fugitive, not expecting contact with an active threat. The engagement lasted 12 seconds. Maria used suppressed weapons and blade work that eliminated all four men before they could transmit a warning or return fire. Their radio check wasn't due for another 8 minutes, giving her time to reposition before their silence would be noticed. She stripped useful equipment from the bodies, including night vision devices and additional ammunition, then moved their weapons to positions that would suggest they had been eliminated by long-range sniper fire from the north. Misdirection was as important as elimination. Team Bravo was advancing along a parallel route 400 meters away, their progress marked by occasional radio transmissions that revealed their position and timing. Maria used the intervening terrain to position herself along their projected path, selecting an ambush site that would allow engagement and escape without exposure to the other search teams. The second engagement was more complex because Team Bravo was maintaining better tactical discipline. Their point man was scanning carefully for threats, and their spacing made simultaneous elimination impossible with her current position. Maria solved the problem with explosives, using charges taken from the compound to create a blast pattern that eliminated 2 men instantly while disorienting the survivors. She engaged the remaining targets with precision fire before they could recover, then immediately displaced to avoid the response that would certainly follow. The radio traffic exploded with urgent transmissions as the search coordinator tried to understand what had happened to 2 of his teams. The communications revealed both tactical competence and growing concern as the operation shifted from manhunt to active combat. This is Control. Alpha Team, report status. Bravo Team, report status. Silence. All teams, this is Control. We have lost contact with Alpha and Bravo. Consolidate positions and report readiness status immediately. The remaining teams began reporting in, their transmissions revealing positions and capabilities that Maria filed away for future reference. 6 teams remaining, plus the helicopter assets, and whatever quick reaction forces might be available from the compound. But the radio traffic also revealed something else, growing fear. Professional soldiers could handle known threats with tactical doctrine and superior firepower, but they struggled with enemies who seemed to appear and disappear like smoke. Maria was becoming legend in real time, transforming from a fugitive to be captured into a supernatural threat that killed without warning and vanished without trace. Fear was a weapon as effective as any in her arsenal. Team Charlie was moving to investigate the site where Team Bravo had been eliminated, their advance cautious but determined. Maria let them reach the ambush site and conduct their investigation, using the time to position herself for an attack on Team Delta, which was advancing to provide support. The psychological impact of finding their dead colleagues was exactly what Maria had intended. Team Charlie's radio discipline degraded as they reported the gruesome efficiency of the attacks, their voices carrying the strain of men who were beginning to understand they were not hunting prey, but had become prey themselves. Control, this is Charlie Leader. We have 8 Kia at grid reference 347521. Weapons missing, no survivors. Request immediate air support. Roger, Charlie. Air support inbound. Maintain position and establish security perimeter. The helicopter response would complicate Maria's tactical situation, but it also represented an opportunity to eliminate multiple targets simultaneously if she could position herself correctly. Helicopters were powerful weapons platforms, but they were also predictable in their approach routes and vulnerable during landing operations. Team Delta was moving to establish a landing zone for the helicopter support, their focus shifting from search operations to securing an area where aircraft could safely operate. The change in mission created new vulnerabilities that Maria could exploit. She intercepted Team Delta 500 meters from their intended landing zone, using the terrain to channel their movement into a kill zone where her superior training and equipment could overcome their numerical advantage. The engagement was brief but decisive, leaving 4 more bodies and creating additional psychological pressure on the surviving teams. The helicopter arrived to find the designated landing zone empty except for the scattered equipment of Team Delta. The pilot's transmission reflected the growing confusion of an operation that was deteriorating rapidly. Control, this is Air 1. Landing zone appears to be compromised. No visual contact with Delta Team. Roger, Air 1. Orbit the area and provide overwatch. We're sending additional teams to secure the LZ. But the additional teams were now operating under stress that degraded their effectiveness. They moved with the mechanical precision of soldiers following doctrine, but their individual actions reflected the fear and uncertainty that came with facing an enemy who seemed to anticipate their every move. Maria used their predictability against them, positioning herself to engage teams Echo and Foxtrot as they advanced toward the compromised landing zone. The desert terrain that had initially favored the search operation was now working in her favor, providing concealment and multiple escape routes. The double engagement eliminated 8 more targets while creating the impression that multiple snipers were operating from different positions. Maria used captured weapons to simulate different firing signatures, then displaced rapidly to avoid the airstrike she knew would follow. The helicopter's response was immediate and devastating, pouring machine gun fire into areas where Maria had been positioned minutes earlier. The pilot was competent and aggressive, but he was firing at ghosts while the real threat repositioned for the next phase of the operation. Team Golf was attempting to establish a blocking position on the high ground, trying to deny Maria the elevation advantage she had been using throughout the engagement. Their movement was tactically sound but slow, giving her time to reach their objective ahead of them. When Team Golf reached the ridge line, they found their intended position occupied by an enemy who had turned their own plan against them. The firefight was intense but brief, ending with Maria in control of the high ground and the search coordinator faced with the loss of another 4-man team. The radio traffic now reflected barely controlled panic as the operations commander tried to maintain coordination with only 2 remaining teams and growing casualties that couldn't be explained by any reasonable tactical assessment. All remaining teams, this is Control. Withdraw to Rally Point Zebra and await further instructions. Air 1, maintain overwatch, but do not engage without positive target identification. But Maria wasn't finished. The remaining teams represented the final phase of an operation that had transformed from mission security to personal survival. Every man who walked away from this desert would carry the story of what had happened, and stories had a way of spreading through networks that reached places she couldn't control. Teams Hotel and India were withdrawing in good order, their movements suggesting professional military training and combat experience. These were not the casual security guards she had eliminated in the initial engagements, but seasoned operators who understood how to conduct fighting withdrawals under pressure. The final engagement would require different tactics, something that acknowledged their competence, while exploiting the psychological advantage she had built through the systematic elimination of their colleagues. Maria needed to end this in a way that would prevent future pursuit, while demonstrating the futility of challenging someone with her particular skill set. She intercepted the withdrawal route at a narrow canyon that would funnel both teams through a confined area where superior numbers couldn't be effectively deployed. The position offered multiple firing angles while limiting their ability to maneuver or call for effective air support. The engagement began at sunset, silhouetting the advancing teams against the desert sky, while Maria remained concealed in the shadows of the canyon walls. She had the advantage of preparation, position, and psychological momentum that came from eliminating 24 enemy soldiers without sustaining significant casualties. The firefight was Maria's masterpiece of tactical execution, combining precision marksmanship with rapid movement that made her seem to be in multiple positions simultaneously. She used the canyon's acoustics to amplify the sound of her weapons while muffling her actual location, creating the impression of a larger force. Team Hotel was eliminated first, their tactical formation disrupted by ricochets and crossfire that seemed to come from impossible angles. Team India lasted longer, their leader demonstrating genuine skill and courage, but they were ultimately overwhelmed by an enemy who fought with supernatural effectiveness. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the sound of helicopter rotors and the distant radio calls from a coordinator who was beginning to understand the true scope of his losses. Air 1, this is Control. Report status on ground teams. Control, Air 1. No movement observed. No response to radio calls. Recommend immediate extraction of command personnel. The helicopter circled the canyon once more, its searchlight revealing the scattered evidence of a battle that would become legend in intelligence circles for decades to come. 32 professional soldiers had entered the desert to hunt one woman, and none of them would be going home. Maria emerged from the canyon as the helicopter departed, carrying her original equipment plus selected items taken from the various engagement sites. The intelligence she had gathered from the compound remained secure, but it was now secondary to the message she had delivered. Her communication device buzzed with a final transmission from Morrison. Extraction team at coordinates you transmitted. Medical support available. But Maria no longer needed extraction in the traditional sense. The suburban life was over, the cover identity burned beyond recovery. Emma would be told that her mother had died in a car accident, just as Maria Elena Vasquez had supposedly died 7 years earlier. She walked toward the extraction coordinates, but she was no longer the same person who had begun this mission. The woman who had boarded the helicopter had no name, no history, and no connections to the world of permission slips and soccer practice. Behind her, the desert would keep its secrets, but the men who had survived long enough to flee would carry stories that would spread through intelligence networks and criminal organizations alike. They would whisper about the ghost who had returned from the dead, the woman who had reminded everyone why some people should never be hunted. Maria Elena Vasquez had died twice now, but something else had been born in that desert, something that would make the intelligence community's most dangerous enemies think twice before threatening the things she had chosen to protect. The last transmission she sent before reaching the extraction point was simple but clear. Mission accomplished. 32 confirmed, requesting new identity and assignment. She was no longer a suburban mother trying to balance normal life with covert operations. She was what she had always been, the most effective weapon the intelligence community had ever created, now fully awakened and ready for whatever came next. The helicopter lifted off into the desert night, carrying someone who existed in no official records, but whose actions would influence intelligence operations for years to come. Below them, the compound continued its evacuation, but everyone involved now understood they had encountered something that transcended normal operational parameters. In Millbrook Heights, Emma Santos would soon learn that her mother had been killed in a tragic accident during a business trip to Mexico. She would grieve and eventually heal, never knowing that her mother's sacrifice had disrupted a weapons trafficking network that would have armed conflicts across 3 continents. But somewhere in the darkness above the desert, a ghost smiled and began planning her next mission. The war was far from over, and Maria Elena Vasquez had work to do.